On June 5, 1944, the U.S. Army took Rome. It was the first Axis capital to fall in the Second World War and a sign of how the tide had turned. The Stars and Stripes magazine had a banner headline that day, "We're in Rome." But as the New York Times noted on June 6th, that glory was fleeting. The next day, the headline read a single word: invasion. After D-Day, Italy became just a forgotten second front, even though the fighting there ground terribly on, and included some of the most unique Allied fighting formations of the war, none perhaps more unique than Task Force 45. Although it operated for only a few months of bitter fighting, Task Force 45 has to be seen as one of the most peculiar Allied fighting units of the Second World War. It is history that deserves to be remembered. The Italian campaign, generally considered to have started with the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, was a grinding, nearly two-year campaign that would cause nearly 1 million military casualties. There was significant discussion among the Allies whether the campaign was actually necessary at all, with the U.S. particularly preferring an attack on northwest Europe. Italy provided exceptional terrain for defense, and an Axis strategy under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring used a series of defensive lines to make the campaign as costly as possible for the Allies. Bogged down in Kesselring's defensive line south of Rome, in January the Allies landed some 40,000 troops in an amphibious operation near the city of Anzio, while coordinating with an attack on the Axis winter line. The bloody battles of Anzio and Monte Cassino resulted in more than 98,000 Allied casualties. The U.S. Sixth Corps did not break out of the Anzio beachhead until May. Then, in one of the most controversial Allied decisions of the Second World War, Lieutenant General Mark Clark, commander of the U.S. Fifth Army, ordered General Lucien Truscott's Sixth Corps to move on Rome rather than cutting off the retreat of the German Tenth Army. One military historian criticized the decision as being as militarily stupid as it was insubordinate. The move allowed the U.S. Army and General Clark to garner headlines for capturing Rome, but the cost was that the German 10th Army was able to escape and join with the rest of Kesselring's forces in defense of the formidable Gothic line. By some accounts, Clark's decision led to another year of hard fighting on the Italian front. What's more, it wasn't just headlines that had been shifted to France. Of the nearly 250,000 troops of the U.S. Fifth Army, some 100,000 were transferred to support the invasion of southern France. The Allied armies, the U.S. Fifth Army and the British Eighth Army under the overall command of British General Sir Harold Alexander, were facing a formidable veteran Axis force entrenched on a line considered to be almost impregnable. And given the shifting of resources to France, the Fifth Army was desperately short of riflemen to support the attack. The website History.net notes, as the Allies stood on the south bank of the Arno River in July, preparing to assault Kesselring's most formidable barrier yet, the infamous Gothic line, the Americans clearly had too many tanks and not enough infantrymen. The troops that had been reassigned to France were only partly replaced by the assignment of the 10th Mountain Division and the 25,000 men of the Brazilian Expeditionary Force. Desperate for line troops, on July 24th, Major General Willis D. Krittenberger, commander of U.S. Four Corps, ordered that the men of the 45th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Brigade be converted to riflemen as Task Force 45. According to the National World War II Museum, at the beginning of World War II, the U.S. Anti-Aircraft Artillery Force was very much the poor stepchild of the Coast Artillery Corps. As the Allies witnessed the successes of the German Luftwaffe, the decision was made to expand the U.S. AAA Corps to 800 battalions and some 619,000 men. But by 1944, the Luftwaffe was much depleted, and the Allies had largely obtained air superiority over combat areas. Moreover, the drain of constant combat had left the Army short of infantry. Later, in 1944, the Army would reduce the number of AAA battalions from 800 to 575. Men in the United States training for AAA units were sent to infantry training school to serve as replacements for combat units. The 45th AAA Brigade operated anti-aircraft artillery, both self-propelled pieces based on the M3 half-track and towed guns, in 9 battalions, including all told some 7,000 men. Units of the 45th had served through the North African campaign and across Sicily. The brigade had defended the Anzio beachhead from Luftwaffe attacks, although AAA units also participated in ground combat support as well, with the M45 quad mount mounting 4 M2 50 caliber guns earning the nickname Krautmower. 4 of the brigade's battalions were reassigned to another AAA group to continue to operate as AAA. Despite extensive combat experience, the officers and enlisted men of the 45th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Brigade were not trained as infantry. Each would have received basic training in the United States, would have been checked out on the M1 rifle, but they had not received the additional 8 weeks of infantry training. In general, they were both ill-prepared and unenthusiastic about the role of provisional infantry to which they had been suddenly reassigned. Equipment that was uniquely anti-aircraft artillery was stockpiled behind the lines, left with only enough men to guard and maintain the equipment. AAA battalions usually consisted of 4 batteries, which were then, with a minimum change in personnel, converted into the standard infantry formation of 3 rifle companies and a heavy weapons company. Each rifle company was supplied with 8 Browning automatic rifles, and the heavy weapons company was outfitted with 6 81mm mortars, 10 30 caliber, and 5 50 caliber machine guns. Initially, 4 infantry battalions of 4 companies each were created, while more units from the 45th were sent to intensive infantry training. 4 Corps also supplied a number of experienced infantry officers. The 45th AAA Brigade headquarters would operate both as AAA HQ and as an infantry brigade command, and the new task force was assigned support units, including medical companies, armored reconnaissance units, tanks, tank destroyers, and artillery. The conversion was done with incredible speed. The initial order had been issued on July 24th, and units of the task force began to relieve infantry units in the line the night of July 26th. The task force took their first casualties from enemy artillery that night. The AAA 37mm guns were used as supplemental fire support, and self-propelled AAA guns, the M15 or M16 half-tracks, were used for patrol. Keeping with the ad hoc basis of the task force, on July 29th, some 850 troops from the British AAA batteries were assigned to the group. The task force history notes, the British had no heavy weapons other than 3 captured German 81mm mortars. Subsequently, they also procured 2 75mm pack howitzers, which they employed with deadly effectiveness as close support weapons. The task force had to quickly learn their role, and defending along the Arno River in August, patrols continually made contact, and in the resulting firefight, casualties were taken and inflicted. The units continued to receive infantry training while in contact with the enemy, needing particularly training in the use of mortars, machine guns with infantry mounts, BARs, and rifles. The British anti-aircraft crews then had to be trained on the use of the American heavy weapons. The British entered the line on August 16th and immediately aroused the interest of the enemy, who sent a patrol in platoon strength to investigate. Apparently, the training had been sufficient, as the Tommies received them with mortar and machine gun fire, and the enemy withdrew with several casualties. Symbolic of the composite nature of this unique group, on August 15th, the 100th Infantry Battalion was assigned to the task force. The 100th had been originally formed largely from former members of the Hawaii National Guard, was a Nisei battalion that is made up of Japanese Americans. The 100th had fought across North Africa, Sicily, at Monte Cassino, and then Anzio. So many members of the veteran unit had earned the Purple Heart that it was unofficially called the Purple Heart Battalion. On September 1st, men of the 100th were the first members of the task force to cross the Arno River. Men of the task force were also used to garrison the newly captured city of Pisa. The task force was still subject to casualties from enemy artillery, small arms, mines, and occasional air raids. On September 5th, the task force was assigned another AAA unit, this time Battery C of the 450th AAA Battalion. This battery was an African-American battalion, and Task Force 45 would eventually become closely associated with African-American troops that, after years of lobbying, were being assigned for the first time in combat roles. An African-American infantry battalion, 2nd Battalion of the 370th Infantry, would be assigned to the task force in November. Throughout the month of September, the task force participated in the general advance of 4 Corps against stiffening enemy resistance. And the task force adapted yet again in October, briefly being assigned a part of Task Force Delta with the Brazilian Expeditionary Force. Brazil had declared war on the Axis in August of 1942, and the first troops of the Brazilian Expeditionary Force had arrived in Italy in July. While they had overcome initial issues with both equipment and training, the BEF distinguished themselves in the Italian campaign. In addition to joint operations at the beginning of October, troops from the BEF would be assigned to Task Force 45 in November. The Allies were unable to make a breakthrough in the mountains in the winter of 1944, and German engineers destroyed roads, bridges, and infrastructure. Into this environment, Task Force 45 recruited Italian volunteers to assist engineers in repairing roads. The Italians were described as skillful and conscientious workers. The task force also coordinated with Italian partisans operating in the area, and partisan units later became part of the task force, as did units of Italian volunteers handling mules, which were used as reliable transport in the mountainous region. Of the partisans, the regimental history notes, the partisans fought side by side with our troops and exhibited equal courage and determination in carrying out their mission. The operation ended with a strong mutual respect and admiration existing between these Italian volunteers and our own American troops. In December and January, the task force would work alongside and then later have units assigned from the 10th Mountain Division, a division specially trained in Alpine operations on their first operational deployment. The task force was officially disbanded February 12, 1945, after less than 8 months of operation. Although short-lived, Task Force 45 participated in some of the most grueling fighting and some of the most difficult conditions on the Western Front. Lieutenant General Lucian Truscott, commander of the U.S. Fifth Army, said of them, "I have heard nothing but praise of the performance of the men and organizations of the 45th Anti-Aircraft Brigade, both in their anti-aircraft role and in ground action as a frontline element of the Fifth Army." The role of Task Force 45 was unique. Not only was it constituted from anti-aircraft units not trained for the role in which they were impressed, but it operated under constantly varying conditions, with at various times the number of men assigned ranging from 3,000 to 8,000. Major General Crittenden, commander of the 4 Corps, noted that although not organized, trained, or equipped to do so, it was nevertheless functioned in a role similar to that of combat division in battle. And during the 8 months period in which the 45th AAA Brigade had been part of 4 Corps, it successfully executed a wide variety of missions over varied terrain and under all conditions of weather. Most of the units that had been assigned to Task Force 45 were reassigned within the Fifth Army, and a new infantry regiment, the 473rd Infantry Regiment, was created from many of the anti-aircraft artillery crewmen who had served in Task Force 45. Although in an odd twist, those that served with the 473rd were eligible for the Combat Infantry Badge, while those that only served with Task Force 45 were not, as they were merely provisional infantry. At different times, Task Force 45 included combatants from 4 different nations. They also included some of the earliest deployment of African American troops in combat in the Second World War, one of the famed Nice battalions, and some of the earliest U.S. deployment of Alpine troops. The history that was written about Task Force 45 summed up their short-lived, obscure, yet important contribution. It did much with little. British Tommies who rode forward on American tanks, with American artillery behind and American engineers in front, and American troops that left their foxhole with British artillery firing protection from behind, and Italians out their side and out ahead, and Brazilians on their flank, learned that different people can fight well together. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long, and if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.